My name is Eleanor Vance, and at 32, I never imagined my father's birthday celebration would become the night my family finally learned the truth about my success. For years, my parents Thomas and Charlotte Vance and my sister Isabel had dismissed my career aspirations, convinced I'd never amount to anything significant. They had no idea I owned the very luxury hotel where we stood until that precise moment when Isabel physically blocked my path, declaring I couldn't possibly afford such an upscale establishment. My mother's hushed warning, "Don't embarrass us," still echoed in my ears as Liam O'Connell, my security chief, approached. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from, hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should believe in you most. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in suburban Minneapolis, I was always the odd one out in my family. My parents, Thomas and Charlotte Vance, ran a moderately successful accounting firm, providing us with a comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle. My sister Isabel, 2 years younger than me, became the golden child almost from birth. She was conventionally pretty socially adept and excelled at the things my parents valued: maintaining appearances, following traditional paths, and never rocking the boat. I, on the other hand, was more introverted and ambitious in ways my family simply couldn't grasp. While Isabel joined the cheerleading squad and dated the football captain, I started a small business selling customized planners to students when I was 16. My parents saw it as a cute hobby, at best a distraction from real studies at worst. "Eleanor, why can't you focus on something practical?" my mother would ask whenever she found me working on business plans late at night. "Look at your sister. She's applying to all the right colleges, making connections. That's how you get ahead in life." The dismissal of my entrepreneurial spirit became a constant theme. When I announced I wanted to study hospitality management and business instead of accounting or law, my father's disappointment was palpable. "That's not a real degree, Ellie," he'd said during a tense dinner. "Hotels! You want to be what, a glorified housekeeper? We didn't raise you to aim so low." Despite their disapproval, I held firm. I had to pay my own way through college while my parents covered every expense for Isabel's business degree at an Ivy League school. I worked 3 jobs: morning shifts at a hotel front desk, afternoon classes, and evening waiting tables at an upscale restaurant. Those years were exhausting, but educational in ways my formal studies couldn't match. During my junior year, I met Professor Anya Sharma, a hospitality management professor who became my mentor. She recognized something in me that my family never did: raw determination and a natural talent for identifying overlooked opportunities in the luxury market. "You have an eye for potential, Eleanor Quay," Professor Sharma told me after I presented a business case study that impressed her. "Most students see properties as they are. You see what they could become." With Professor Sharma's guidance, I secured an internship at the Meridian Hotel Group during my senior year. While most interns fetched coffee and made copies, I spent every spare moment studying their business model, identifying inefficiencies, and quietly drafting improvement proposals that I never expected anyone to read. 3 months in, I accidentally left one of my analysis reports on the desk of Mr. David Miller, the regional director. I'd meant to grab it before he returned from lunch, but he found it first. The next day, I was called into his office, certain I was about to be fired for overstepping. Instead, Mr. Miller offered me a junior management position upon graduation. "This analysis is better than what I get from consultants I pay thousands," he said, tapping my report. "We need people who think like you." When I called my parents with the news, their response was lukewarm at best. "Well, at least you'll have steady employment," my mother said, though management trainee isn't exactly executive material. "Isabel just got offered a junior analyst position at Goldman Sachs, you know." I stopped sharing my career milestones after that. They didn't know when I was promoted to hotel manager at 26, or when I developed a guest loyalty program that increased the Meridian Group's revenue by 15%. They certainly didn't know when I left to start my own boutique hotel consulting firm at 28, or when I secured enough investors to purchase my first struggling property a year later. The Athena Hotel had been a faded 5-star establishment, losing money for years before I acquired it. I renovated extensively, rebranded brilliantly, and turned it into the most exclusive boutique hotel in Minneapolis within 18 months. My second property followed then, a third, and 6 months later, by my 32nd birthday, I owned a small but prestigious collection of luxury hotels across the Midwest, with the flagship Athena being my crown jewel and personal residence. I maintained the penthouse suite as my home. My parents and Isabel remained oblivious to all of this. In their minds, I was still struggling in some middle management hotel position, barely making ends meet. I never corrected them, partly because they never asked, and partly because their assumptions revealed more about them than they did about me. As for my personal life, I kept that separate from family as well. My closest friend became Liam O'Connell, the brilliant security chief I hired for the Athena, a former military intelligence officer with a degree in cybersecurity. Liam quickly became my most trusted confidant and right-hand man in all business matters. We developed a friendship built on mutual respect and a shared vision for what exceptional service truly meant. I dated occasionally, but my focus remained primarily on building my business empire. The hotels became my children, my staff, my extended family. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd created the very thing my biological family had failed to provide: a supportive environment where achievement was recognized and celebrated. This was the backdrop against which my father's 60th birthday approached. I hadn't been home for a family gathering in nearly 2 years, making excuses about work commitments that weren't entirely untrue. But this milestone seemed important enough to warrant an appearance, and perhaps I thought an opportunity to finally bridge the gap between the person my family thought I was and the woman I'd become. What I didn't anticipate was just how wide that gap had grown, or how spectacularly it would collapse. The unveiling. 2 months before my father's 60th birthday, I received a group text from my mother, planning surprise dinner for Dad's 60th. Looking at Giovanni's, or the Athena Hotel restaurant. Thoughts, Isojo. I nearly dropped my phone. The Athena. My Athena. It was on her short list. For a moment, I considered telling them the truth right then, but something held me back. Perhaps it was years of conditioning, or maybe an unexpected opportunity for a more meaningful revelation. The Athena has a great reputation, I texted back casually. Their private dining room is supposed to be exceptional. It's very expensive, my mother replied, probably out of our budget. And yours, obviously. That stung, but I was used to it. I could help with costs, I offered. We don't need charity, Eleanor. Your sister Isabel is doing very well at her firm and has offered to cover half. We'll figure out the rest. I bit back a sarcastic response, and instead suggested I could look into potential discounts through industry connections. My mother reluctantly agreed, which gave me the opening I needed. That afternoon, I called Brendan Thorne, my general manager at the Athena. Brendan, my family is planning my father's birthday dinner at our restaurant next month. They have no idea I own the place. Seriously, Brendan laughed. That's either cosmic irony or fantastic timing. A bit of both. Here's what I need they'll call to make a reservation for the Vance party. Give them our best private dining room, the Winston Suite. Full service premium everything. But when they ask for the price, quote them exactly half of the actual cost. I'll cover the difference anonymously. And should we acknowledge you as the owner when you arrive? Brendan asked. I paused, considering this crucial detail. No. Treat me like any other guest initially. I'll find the right moment to reveal the truth. Over the next few weeks, I monitored the reservation process from afar. My mother called multiple times, haggling over details and questioning the surprisingly reasonable rate for such a prestigious venue. My executive chef, Chef Remy, developed a special menu, and I arranged for my father's favorite wines to be served throughout the evening. A week before the event, my sister Isabel called me directly, something that rarely happened. So you're actually coming to Dad's birthday? She sounded skeptical. Of course. It's an important milestone. Mom says you got some kind of discount at the Athena. How exactly did you manage that? It's not like you're a VIP guest there. The perfect opportunity to come clean presented itself, but again, I hesitated. Something about Isabel's tone, the assumption of my insignificance, made me want to wait for a more dramatic revelation. I've done some consulting work for hotel groups, I said vaguely. Industry courtesy, right? She didn't bother hiding her disbelief. Well, try to dress appropriately. The Athena is pretty upscale. Maybe I can lend you something if you don't have anything suitable. I glanced down at the custom Valentino dress I was wearing for a business meeting and smiled to myself. I'll manage, just don't embarrass us, she added before hanging up. Those words would prove remarkably ironic in just a few days. The night before the dinner, I received another call this time from my mother. Eleanor, we've had to add a few people to the guest list. The Robertsons, you remember Jim Robertson, your father's golf partner, and the Clarks from the neighborhood association. Oh, and Isabel's bringing her new boyfriend Marcus. He's a junior partner at her firm, very impressive young man. That sounds fine, I replied. The room can accommodate up to 20 people. How would you know that? My mother's suspicion was immediate. I looked at their website when you mentioned booking there. I recovered quickly. Well, anyway, with the additional guests, we're concerned about the cost. I know you offered to contribute, but we're thinking it might be best if you handle the tip for the servers instead. That way, you can participate without stretching your budget too thin. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. Sure, Mom, I'd be happy to take care of the gratuity. Wonderful, and Eleanor, please be punctual. The reservation is at 7 sharp, and you know how your father hates tardiness. After hanging up, I sat in my office overlooking the Minneapolis skyline, contemplating the following evening. Part of me felt childish for not simply telling my family the truth about my success. Another part recognized this as the perfect opportunity to address years of dismissal and disrespect. I called Liam, my security chief, and outlined a plan for the following evening. His deep laugh echoed through the phone. "You're sure about this approach?" he asked. "It's a bit theatrical. Sometimes a demonstration is more effective than an explanation," I replied. "Besides, they've written their own script for this scenario. I'm just following their lead to its natural conclusion." "As always, I've got your back," Liam assured me. "Tomorrow will certainly be memorable." That night, I slept in my penthouse suite above the Athena, the hotel my family believed I couldn't afford to dine in, let alone own. Tomorrow would indeed change everything, though not in ways any of us could fully anticipate. The revelation. The evening of my father's birthday arrived with perfect theatrical timing. A light snowfall had begun dusting the Athena's historic facade with a crystalline glow that highlighted its restored Art Deco details. I'd intentionally arranged to arrive separately from my family, claiming a last-minute work commitment would make me slightly late. In reality, I wanted to observe their entrance from the hotel's security cameras. Dressed in a midnight blue Givenchy gown, simple, elegant, but unmistakably expensive. I sat in my private office, adjacent to the main kitchen, watching the monitors as my family arrived 40 minutes early. My mother wearing what I recognized as her special occasion outfit, a 10-year-old St. John suit she reserved for country club events and weddings, immediately began inspecting everything from the marble floors to the floral arrangements. My father looked uncomfortable, but impressed, straightening his tie repeatedly as he gazed up at the restored ceiling murals I'd commissioned from a renowned artist. Isabel arrived moments later with her new boyfriend Marcus, both dressed like they were attending a gala rather than a family dinner. She immediately took charge, speaking loudly to the concierge and gesturing dramatically as though she belonged there and was doing everyone a favor by explaining how things should be handled. I watched as Brendan, my GM, personally greeted them and escorted them to the Winston suite, where champagne and appetizers awaited. My mother's surprise was evident even on the small security screen. I'd authorized far more than the reasonable package she'd been quoted. Miss Vance, my executive chef, Chef Remy, appeared at my office door. "Everything is prepared according to your specifications. The wine has been decanting for 3 hours, and we've included your father's favorite bourbon for after dinner." "Perfect, Remy. Thank you." I stood smoothing my dress. "I think it's time for me to make my entrance." As planned, I texted Liam to take his position near the hotel's grand entrance. Then I left through my private elevator, exiting the hotel entirely, and walking around to approach from the main entrance like any other guest. The timing needed to be precise. I arrived just as the remaining guests were checking in with the front desk. Standing slightly back from the group, I observed as the Robertsons and Clarks were directed toward the private dining room. Just as I prepared to follow them, Isabel emerged from a hallway, presumably returning from the restroom. Her eyes landed on me, narrowing with immediate judgment. The smile that spread across her face wasn't friendly. It was the same condescending expression I'd seen countless times growing up. "Eleanor, you actually showed up." She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my dress shoes and the simple but obviously real diamond earrings I wore. "Wow, you borrowed something nice." "Hello, Isabel. You look lovely," I replied, refusing to engage with her implicit criticism. She frowned, perhaps disappointed I hadn't given her more ammunition. "Mom was worried you'd back out or show up looking like you just left work at wherever it is you're working these days." "I'm exactly where I want to be career-wise," I said honestly. "Right." She glanced over my shoulder toward the entrance, then her eyes widened. "Oh, you didn't. Please tell me you didn't bring a date to Dad's birthday. This is a family event, Eleanor." I turned to see Liam entering impeccable in his tailored suit. Before I could explain he wasn't joining us, my mother appeared beside Isabel. "Eleanor, finally. We've been here for ages." She barely looked at me, her attention immediately shifting to Liam. "And who is this we didn't arrange for extra seating?" "This is—" I began, but Liam smoothly interjected. "Good evening, Mrs. Vance. I'm Liam O'Connell, head of security for the Athena Hotel. I just needed a brief word with Miss Vance." My mother's expression shifted instantly from irritation to embarrassment. "Security, Eleanor, what have you done now?" Before I could respond, Isabel stepped directly in front of me, physically blocking my path toward the restaurant, as though preventing me from fleeing. "Is there a problem with her reservation?" Isabel asked Liam, speaking about me, as if I weren't present. "We can cover her portion if that's the issue." My mother moved closer, her voice dropping to that particular whisper that somehow carried perfectly despite its lowered volume. "Eleanor, don't embarrass the family. If you're having financial problems again, you should have said something before coming to a place like this." The lobby had grown quiet with several guests and staff pausing to observe the unfolding drama. Brendan had appeared near the restaurant entrance, watching with barely concealed amusement. He caught my eye, raising an eyebrow in question. I gave him an almost imperceptible nod. "Actually," Liam said, his professional tone unwavering, "I wanted to inform Miss Vance that her special requests for the evening have been arranged according to her specifications." "Special requests?" My mother looked confused. "What special requests?" Isabel rolled her eyes. "Mom, she probably asked for the cheapest wine option or something. Can we please go back to the party Marcus is telling Dad about his new BMW?" She turned, attempting to guide my mother away while still blocking my path. That's when Liam cleared his throat loudly. "Mrs. Vance, Miss Isabel, perhaps you're unaware that you're currently preventing the owner of this establishment from entering her own property." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother froze mid-step while Isabel slowly turned back toward me, her expression caught between disbelief and dawning horror. "Excuse me," my mother finally managed. Brendan chose that perfect moment to approach, extending his hand to me with practiced deference. "Miss Vance, everything is prepared for your father's celebration. Chef Remy has included all your requested items, and the 1962 Bordeaux you selected from your personal collection is exceptional with the prime rib." My mother's face had drained of color. "Your personal collection?" I smiled finally, stepping around my stunned sister. "Yes, Mom. From my wine cellar here at the Athena. I've been meaning to tell you both I own this hotel, and the Meridian downtown, and 4 others across the Midwest." Isabel's mouth opened and closed without sound. My mother grabbed the nearest chair for support. That's not possible," she finally whispered. And yet here we are." I gestured toward the restaurant. "Shall we join Dad and the others? I believe we have a celebration to continue." As we walked toward the private dining room, the hotel staff we passed all greeted me by name with the respect reserved for not just any owner, but one they genuinely admired. The whispered, "Good evening, Miss Vance," and "Lovely to see you, Miss Vance," created a symphony of recognition that made denial impossible. Just before entering the Winston suite, Isabel grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "Why didn't you tell us?" she hissed, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. I looked at her hand until she released me, then straightened my sleeve before meeting her eyes. "You never asked," I said simply. "None of you ever asked." Then I pushed open the doors to greet my surprised father, whose expression shifted from confusion to astonishment as the staff welcomed me not as a guest, but as their boss. The evening had only just begun. Aftermath and reshaping relationships. The remainder of my father's birthday dinner unfolded like a surreal play, where half the cast had received an entirely different script. My father, initially shocked into silence by the staff's deference toward me, recovered more quickly than my mother or sister, his surprise gradually transforming into something resembling pride as the evening progressed. "So this is why you've been so secretive about your work," he said during a quiet moment when we found ourselves alone near the dessert table. "You own this entire place. The whole hotel, this one, and several others." I confirmed, watching his eyes widen further. "Why keep it from us?" There was genuine confusion in his voice, without the defensive edge my mother and sister had displayed. I considered my answer carefully. At first, it was because I wasn't sure I'd succeed. Then, when I did, it became clear that you all had a fixed idea of who I was and what I was capable of. After a while, it just seemed easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe. He nodded slowly, looking troubled. "I suppose we haven't given you much reason to share your successes." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of their dismissive treatment I'd ever received from any family member. Before I could respond, my mother approached her social mask firmly back in place after her initial shock. "Eleanor, the Clarks are asking about the historical photographs in the hallway. Since you apparently know everything about this place, perhaps you could enlighten them." Her tone was brittle, her smile fixed. As I excused myself to speak with the guests, I overheard my father asking her, "Did you have any idea about this?" "Of course not," she replied tersely. "She's deliberately kept us in the dark to create this spectacle." The remainder of the evening continued in this vein, my mother maintaining a rigid pleasantness while shooting me looks that fluctuated between disbelief and betrayal. Isabel, oscillating between awkward attempts to align herself with my newfound status and sullen withdrawal. My father growing increasingly fascinated with each revelation about my business empire. By the time the dessert, a custom-created bourbon caramel cake for my father, was served, the party had effectively split into two factions: those who found my success intriguing and those who found it threatening. The Robertsons and Clarks peppered me with questions about the hotel business, while my mother and Isabel sat in strange silence, Marcus looking uncomfortably between them. When the celebration finally concluded around midnight, I instructed Brendan to ensure all guests received luxury gift baskets and transportation home. My father embraced me warmly, whispering, "I'm proud of you, Ellie," before being ushered away by my tight-lipped mother. Isabel lingered, clearly struggling with what to say. "Eleanor," she managed, "so all those times we thought you couldn't afford to join vacations or contribute to family gifts. No, I was building this," I finished for her, gesturing to the elegant surroundings. "And I did send gifts, substantial ones. The vacation to Hawaii for Mom and Dad's anniversary, last year the Christmas checks, all from me. Mom said those were from a distant cousin who'd had a windfall," Isabel said, looking genuinely confused. I laughed without humor. Of course she did. Heaven forbid I be successful in a way she didn't orchestrate or approve. Marcus approached, placing a hand on Isabel's shoulder. "We should go, the car is waiting." "To me," he added with apparent sincerity, "incredible place you've built here. Truly impressive." Isabel shot him a look I couldn't quite interpret, before turning back to me. "We should talk soon." After they departed, I returned to my office, kicked off my heels, and poured myself a generous glass of the same Bordeaux we'd served with dinner. Liam knocked lightly before entering, settling into the chair across from me. "That was quite an evening," he said, loosening his tie. "How are you feeling?" I considered the question, swirling the wine in my glass. Relieved, vindicated, exhausted, sad. I took a sip. "All of the above. Your father seemed to come around." "He did," I acknowledged. "He's always been more reasonable than Mom or Isabel, just not reasonable enough to ever stand up for me." Liam nodded, understanding. "And now what happens tomorrow when the shock wears off?" That was the critical question. The revelation of my success had been dramatic and satisfying in the moment, but I knew enough about family dynamics to recognize this was just the beginning of a complicated renegotiation of relationships and expectations. "I suspect my phone will start ringing very early tomorrow," I said. "My mother will either demand explanations or attempt to rewrite history to claim she always believed in me. Isabel will likely vacillate between resentment and attempts to capitalize on her connection to me." "And you'll respond how?" I set down my glass, suddenly certain of my next steps. "I'm going to set boundaries. Clear, firm boundaries. For the first time in my life, this isn't about revenge or gloating. It's about establishing the respect I should have had all along." Over the next 2 hours, Liam and I outlined a strategy that wasn't about punishing my family, but about protecting myself and creating the possibility of healthier relationships moving forward. I decided to consult with Dr. Evelyn Reed, the therapist I'd been seeing occasionally since purchasing my first hotel, to ensure my approach was constructive rather than reactive, setting new foundations. As predicted, my phone began ringing at 7:03 the next morning. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. A text from Isabel followed immediately. "We need to talk. Can I come by your hotel today?" I responded to neither immediately. Instead, I called Dr. Reed to schedule an emergency session that afternoon. By the time I arrived at her office overlooking Loring Park, I had 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, and an email from my father that simply read, "I owe you an apology, many apologies. When you're ready to talk, I'm ready to listen." That email, so different from my mother's demanding voicemails and Isabel's alternately accusatory and ingratiating texts, gave me hope that at least one relationship might be salvageable. "The question isn't whether you should forgive them," Dr. Reed said after I recounted the previous evening's events. "The question is what kind of relationship you want moving forward, and what boundaries need to be in place to make that relationship healthy for you." By the end of our session, I had clarity about my next steps. This wasn't about punishment or revenge. It wasn't even about forcing acknowledgement of past slights. It was about creating a new dynamic where my autonomy and achievements were respected, and where old patterns of dismissal and diminishment could not continue. I returned to the Athena that evening and instructed the front desk to send up any family members who might arrive unannounced. Then I sat in my penthouse living room, overlooking the city I'd conquered on my own terms, and finally returned my father's email with a simple message. "I'm ready to talk, alone, tomorrow at 2 p.m. in my office at the Athena." It was time to reshape my family relationships as deliberately as I'd built my business empire, with clear vision, firm boundaries, and the unshakable confidence that came from knowing exactly what I was worth. My father arrived for our meeting precisely 10 minutes early, a habit ingrained from decades of client appointments at his accounting firm. Brendan escorted him to my office, where I'd arranged for coffee and my father's favorite cookies from a local bakery. "This is quite a view," he said, gazing out at the Minneapolis skyline from my floor-to-ceiling windows. He seemed smaller, somehow less intimidating than the larger-than-life figure of my childhood. "It's why I chose this office," I replied, gesturing for him to sit. I wanted to be reminded daily of what I was building. An awkward silence fell between us, 32 years of miscommunication and missed connections hanging in the air. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "I don't know where to begin, Eleanor. I'm still trying to process everything. The hotel's your success. The fact that you felt you couldn't share any of it with us." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I tried Dad in the beginning." I kept my voice even determined to remain factual rather than emotional. "When I got my first management position, when I started my consulting firm, when I acquired this hotel, I called home each time. The responses were always the same, dismissive at best, undermining at worst." My father looked genuinely surprised. "I don't remember." When I called about my promotion to hotel manager, Mom said, "At least it's steady work," and immediately changed the subject to Isabel's new apartment. When I mentioned starting my consulting business, you asked if I had a backup plan for when it fails. After a while, it seemed pointless to share my milestones. My father's face flushed with recognition and shame. "I remember now, I didn't realize. I thought we were being practical, encouraging you to be realistic." "You were practical and realistic with me. You were ambitious and encouraging with Isabel. I kept my tone matter-of-fact, not accusatory. Different standards, different expectations, different support. He didn't deny it, which surprised me. Instead, he nodded slowly. Your mother and I, we understood Isabel's path. The corporate ladder, the networking, the traditional markers of success. Your interests seemed so... He struggled for the word. Unconventional, I suggested. Yes, we worried. Perhaps we protected our own comfort by doubting yours. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in years. I was wrong. We were wrong. What you've built here is extraordinary, Eleanor. The acknowledgement, so simple, so overdue, hit me with unexpected force. I blinked back, sudden tears. Thank you for saying that. Your mother is struggling with all this, he continued. She feels deceived, I think. And Isabel is... He trailed off, evidently unsure how to characterize my sister's reaction. I imagine they both feel threatened by the disruption to the family hierarchy, I said. But that's not actually my problem to solve. My father nodded slowly. What happens now? I outlined the boundaries I'd established with Dr. Reed's guidance. I would maintain relationships with my family members individually, rather than as a unit. I would not attend gatherings where my achievements or lifestyle would be minimized or mocked. I would be honest about my success moving forward, but would not tolerate attempts to leverage my resources without respect for my autonomy. That seems reasonable, my father said when I finished. More than reasonable, given everything. I've also scheduled meetings with my attorney tomorrow to remove the anonymity from several gifts I've given the family over the years. The Hawaiian vacation, the Christmas checks, the contributions to your retirement fund. His eyes widened at this last revelation. The extra investment returns from the past 3 years. That was you. Yes. I've been supplementing your retirement account since I sold my second hotel. I wanted you and Mom to be comfortable, but I knew she wouldn't accept direct help from me. My father looked stunned, then deeply ashamed. All this time, we've been treating you like the family underachiever, and you've been quietly supporting us. I didn't do it for gratitude or recognition, I clarified. I did it because I could, and because despite everything, you're my family. But moving forward, I want transparency. No more anonymous gifts. No more pretending to be less successful than I am. He agreed, and our conversation shifted to his birthday celebration. He genuinely enjoyed it. Once the initial shock wore off, he admitted particularly seeing the respect my staff clearly had for me. Your mother kept saying you must have tricked us somehow, that it couldn't possibly be your hotel. He shook his head. I told her she needed to accept the reality in front of her. That didn't go over well. After he left, promising to process everything we discussed, I spent the afternoon in back-to-back meetings with attorney Sarah Chen, my financial advisor, Mr. Robert Davies, and Dr. Reed, solidifying my plan for restructuring family relationships. Attorney Chen helped me draft formal letters documenting past financial gifts and establishing clear parameters for any future family financial interactions. Mr. Davies reviewed my portfolio to ensure my family-related financial decisions wouldn't impact my business operations. Dr. Reed helped me prepare psychologically for the conversations ahead, particularly with my mother, who would likely be the most resistant to the new dynamic. By the end of the day, Operation Family Reset, as Liam jokingly called it, was fully developed. I felt prepared, centered, and for the first time, when dealing with family matters, fully in control of my own narrative. I instructed Brendan to inform the front desk that my mother and sister were to be admitted if they arrived, but not given any information about my whereabouts or schedule. Sure enough, my mother appeared unannounced the following morning, clearly expecting to be immediately ushered into my presence. Mrs. Vance. Brendan greeted her with perfect professional courtesy. Do you have an appointment with Miss Vance today? Her indignation was visible even on the security monitor I was watching from my office. I don't need an appointment. I'm her mother. Sai, I understand, but Miss Vance is currently in meetings. I'd be happy to check her availability later today or schedule something for tomorrow. The boundary, so simple, so standard for anyone else, was clearly shocking to her. After several minutes of increasingly agitated protest, she finally left, but not before informing Brendan that she would deal with Eleanor directly about this ridiculous situation. She called immediately upon leaving the hotel. This time I answered, "Hello, Mom. What on earth is going on, Eleanor? I just came to see you at this hotel of yours, and I was treated like some sort of stranger." "You were treated like any other visitor without an appointment," I corrected gently. "I run a business, Mom. I have meetings, responsibilities, schedules. I'm your mother. I shouldn't need an appointment to see my own daughter. Would you drop by Isabel's law firm and expect to be immediately shown to her office?" The silence on the end told me the point had registered. "This is different," she finally said, but with less conviction. "It's really not. My business, my career, my professional standing, they all deserve the same respect you've always given Isabel's." Another pause. "We need to discuss what happened at your father's birthday as a family. I'm happy to talk with you, Mom, but not until you're ready to acknowledge some uncomfortable truths about how you've treated me and my career choices over the years." "This isn't about—" It's exactly about that," I interrupted firmly. "I'm not angry, and I'm not trying to punish anyone, but I am establishing boundaries that should have been in place long ago." By the end of our conversation, we'd agreed to meet the following week with Dr. Reed present as a mediator. It wasn't an ideal solution from my mother's perspective, but she'd recognized I was no longer the daughter who could be dismissed or manipulated. Isabel proved more adaptable, if not more sincere. She arrived at the Athena that afternoon, Marcus in tow, requesting a tour of my sister's amazing hotel. The pivot from condescension to sudden sisterly pride was transparent, but I decided to accept it as a starting point. As I showed them around, Isabel peppered me with questions about the business, the clientele, the profit margins, clearly calculating the full extent of my success. Marcus seemed genuinely impressed, asking thoughtful questions about the hospitality industry and my management philosophy. "You know," Isabel said, as we concluded the tour in the rooftop garden I had installed the previous spring, "we should talk about potential collaborations. The firm is always looking for impressive venues for client events, and family discount rates would be a win-win, Sibaos." And there it was, the true purpose of her visit. Not reconciliation, not genuine interest in my life, but determining how my success could benefit her. "Sigh, I don't offer family discount rates," I said pleasantly, but firmly. "The Athena maintains consistent pricing for all clients, but your firm is welcome to book through our corporate events department like any other business." Her smile faltered slightly. "But surely for your own sister." "I value our relationship too much to complicate it with business entanglements," I interrupted smoothly. "So, I've found that clear boundaries between family and business are essential for both to thrive." Marcus nodded appreciatively at this, earning a sharp look from Isabel. The rest of their visit passed uneventfully, and by the time they left, Isabel had received the same message I delivered to our parents. I was open to a relationship, but only one based on mutual respect and clear boundaries. That evening, I had dinner with Liam in my penthouse, recounting the day's interactions. "Phase 1 complete," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "How does it feel?" I considered the question carefully. "Like I'm finally the author of my own story, instead of a secondary character in someone else's." The challenging family meeting with my mother still lay ahead, but for the first time, I felt fully prepared for whatever came next. This wasn't about revenge or retaliation for years of dismissal. It was about reclaiming my narrative and establishing the respect that should have been there all along. Sometimes I reflected the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't proving others wrong. It's living your truth so completely that their opinion becomes irrelevant. The new narrative. The family meeting I'd arranged with my mother took place in a neutral setting, a private conference room at Dr. Reed's office building, rather than my hotel or my parents' home. This location choice was deliberate, removing the power dynamics associated with either territory and signaling that this was a facilitated discussion, not a casual family chat. My mother arrived 15 minutes early, dressed as though for a business negotiation in a tailored navy suit, her posture rigid with defensive energy. My father arrived 5 minutes later, nodding to me with cautious optimism. Dr. Reed welcomed us all with professional warmth, establishing ground rules for our conversation: no interrupting, no personal attacks, and a focus on I statements rather than accusatory you statements. "We're here to establish healthier communication patterns," Dr. Reed explained, "not to assign blame or revisit every past grievance. My mother's skeptical expression made it clear she viewed this whole approach as unnecessary psychobabble, but she nodded agreement nonetheless. I began, as we'd planned, speaking calmly about my experience growing up as the less favored child, the consistent dismissal of my career choices, and the pattern of minimizing my achievements while celebrating Isabel's. I provided specific examples without emotionality, simply laying out the facts as I had experienced them. While I was working 3 jobs to put myself through college, you paid Isabel's full tuition and housing at Cornell, I said. When I landed my first management position, you changed the subject to Isabel's new apartment. When I called to share that I'd started my own consulting firm, Dad asked if I had a backup plan for when it fails. My mother's face flushed as I continued, her hands clasping and unclasping in her lap. When I finished my opening statement, Dr. Reed turned to her. Charlotte, would you like to respond to what Eleanor has shared? Sorry. My mother straightened, her voice tightly controlled. I think there have been some misinterpretations of our intentions. We've always wanted what's best for both our daughters. Perhaps we expressed more concern about Eleanor's choices because they seemed riskier, less conventional. The concern wasn't the issue, I clarified. It was the assumption of failure, the lack of support, the constant comparison to Isabel's more appropriate path. We supported you. My mother's composure cracked slightly. We gave you a good home, a good education through high school. My father interjected quietly. We did make Eleanor pay her own way through college while covering everything for Isabel. My mother turned to him, betrayal evident in her expression. That was different. Isabel was at an Ivy League school, the expenses were much higher. All the more reason I might have needed help, I pointed out. The conversation continued in this vein for nearly an hour, my mother alternately defensive and dismissive, my father increasingly reflective and acknowledging, and me remaining steady in my perspective while open to theirs. Dr. Reed guided the discussion skillfully, preventing derailments and keeping us focused on the path forward, rather than just rehashing the past. The breaking point came when my mother finally voiced what seemed to be her core grievance. Why did you hide your success from us? Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to learn about your hotels in front of all our friends, to realize our daughter has been lying to us for years? I wasn't lying, I replied evenly. I simply stopped sharing. There's a difference. But why? She pressed, genuine confusion breaking through her anger. Because every time I did share, you diminished it. After years of that, it became clear that my success didn't fit the narrative you had created about who I was and what I was capable of. It was less painful to keep it to myself than to have it consistently devalued. Something in my measured response seemed to finally penetrate. My mother fell silent, her gaze dropping to her hands. I never thought of it that way, she said finally, her voice uncharacteristically small. I always saw myself as the practical one, the realist keeping everyone's feet on the ground. For Isabel, you were her cheerleader. For me, you were the voice of caution and doubt, I said gently. Both daughters needed both responses at different times. My father reached for my mother's hand, squeezing it gently. She's right, Charlotte. We've treated them differently from the beginning. We've expected Eleanor to fail and Isabel to succeed, and both have fulfilled our expectations, Isabel, by following our approved path, and Eleanor by succeeding despite our lack of faith in her. The admission, so simple, so profound, hung in the air between us. My mother's eyes filled with tears, something I'd rarely witnessed in my life. "Ma, I don't know how to fix this," she admitted. "It starts with acknowledgement," Dr. Reed offered, "which you've begun today, and it continues with new patterns of interaction moving forward." We spent the next hour outlining these new patterns. My parents would respect my professional boundaries, acknowledge my achievements without qualification, and cease comparing my path to Isabel's. I would maintain honesty about my life and success rather than withdrawal. We would build a relationship based on who we actually were, rather than outdated family roles and expectations. "And Isabel?" my mother asked eventually. "She's struggling with all this too." "My relationship with Isabel is separate," I explained. "We'll need to find our own path forward." As the session concluded, Dr. Reed suggested we take a week to process everything before our next meeting. My father hugged me warmly as we prepared to leave. My mother, after a moment's hesitation, approached more cautiously. "Your hotel is beautiful," she said, the compliment clearly difficult for her. "I'd like to understand more about what you've built, if you're willing to share." It was a small step, but a significant one. "I'd like that," I replied. 3 days later, Isabel requested a meeting alone without Marcus or our parents. We met at a small cafe, equidistant between her law firm and the Athena, neutral territory for a conversation that proved more challenging than the one with our parents. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she began without preamble. "Creating all this family drama, making mom and dad feel terrible." I'm not doing anything to them," I replied calmly. "I'm simply establishing honest, respectful relationships after years of the opposite. They've always supported us." "They've always supported you," I corrected. "There's a difference." Isabel's expression shifted from indignation to uncertainty. I never asked to be the favorite." "I know, but you never questioned it either." I kept my tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "When they praised your conventional choices, while dismissing my entrepreneurial ones, when they funded your education, while making me work 3 jobs, when they celebrated your achievements, while minimizing mine, you accepted it as the natural order of things." She fell silent, stirring her latte with uncharacteristic intensity. "I didn't realize how different things were for you," she finally admitted. "From my perspective, you always seemed so independent, like you didn't need anyone's approval or help." "I became independent because I had to be," I explained. "And then that independence was used against me as proof I didn't need the support you automatically received." Our conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, more honest than any we'd had in our adult lives. Unlike our parents, Isabel never fully acknowledged her role in the family dynamic, but she did express a tentative willingness to establish a more equitable relationship moving forward. "I can't promise I'll get it right immediately," she said as we prepared to leave. "Old habits and all that." "I'm not expecting perfection," I assured her, "just effort and awareness, enduring change and new beginnings." The following week brought a series of small but significant shifts. My father called to ask detailed questions about my business model, genuinely interested in understanding my work. My mother sent a handwritten note apologizing for her reaction at the birthday dinner and requesting a proper tour of the Athena when you have time in your schedule. Isabel texted about meeting for lunch without any ulterior motive of discussing potential business connections. Liam observed these changes with measured optimism when we met for our weekly business dinner. "Family dynamics don't transform overnight," he cautioned. "There will be backsliding old patterns reasserting themselves." "I know," I acknowledged, "but for the first time, I feel like they're seeing me, the real me, not the version that fits their predetermined narrative." "And if they revert to type?" he asked, ever the pragmatist. "Then I maintain my boundaries," I said with newfound certainty. "The difference now is that I've made those boundaries explicit, so crossing them becomes a choice rather than an unconscious habit." The true test came a month later when my mother organized a family dinner at their home, the first since my father's birthday revelation. I arrived prepared for potential regression, but was pleasantly surprised to find subtle but meaningful changes in the dynamic. My mother had placed several framed articles about me and my hotels on the living room wall, alongside Isabel's law school diploma and firm partnership announcement. My father asked for my opinion on a potential investment opportunity, valuing my business acumen in a way he never had before. Even Isabel made an effort, mentioning a client who had stayed at the Athena and raved about the experience. The most telling moment came during dessert, when my mother mentioned a fundraising gala she was helping organize. "We'd love to have your support, Eleanor," she said, then catching herself added, "not because of your resources, but because it's a cause I think would interest you given your involvement with women's entrepreneurship programs." It was a small adjustment in language, but it represented a significant shift in perception, acknowledging my philanthropic interests, rather than just my financial capacity, seeing me as a person with values and priorities, rather than merely a resource to be tapped. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey of the past few months. The revelation at my father's birthday dinner had been dramatic, even theatrical, but the real work had happened in the quieter moments afterward. The honest conversations, the established boundaries, the gradual rebuilding of relationships on more authentic foundations. The revenge I'd initially contemplated after years of dismissal had transformed into something far more valuable: genuine recognition and respect, not because I owned luxury hotels or had achieved financial success, but because I had finally demanded acknowledgement of my worth beyond those external markers. The family dynamics weren't perfect, nor would they ever be, but they had shifted from automatic dismissal to conscious effort. And in family relationships, that movement represented a revolution of sorts. As I entered my penthouse that night, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. The view of Minneapolis spread before me, lights twinkling against the night sky. A visual reminder of all I had built despite the doubts and dismissals. Some might say living well is the best revenge, but I had discovered something more powerful. Living authentically is the best resolution. 6 months after the revelations at my father's birthday dinner, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse suite, watching the sunset over Minneapolis. The city glowed golden in the fading light, a beautiful backdrop for reflecting on how dramatically my family relationships had transformed since that pivotal night. The changes hadn't been instantaneous or seamless. There had been setbacks, moments when my mother slipped into old patterns of comparison, when Isabel's competitive nature resurfaced, when the ingrained dynamics of our family threatened to reassert themselves. But the difference now is that these instances were recognized, addressed, and corrected, rather than accepted as inevitable. My relationship with my father had improved the most significantly. Free from my mother's stronger personality, he had begun visiting the Athena regularly, genuinely curious about my business operations. He'd even started offering accounting advice when requested, not with the patronizing tone of the past, but with professional respect for a fellow business owner. I never gave you enough credit," he admitted during one of our monthly lunch meetings. "I was so focused on traditional paths to success that I couldn't recognize you were pioneering a better one." My mother's transformation had been more measured, but still meaningful. She no longer dismissed my career or compared me unfavorably to Isabel, though I sometimes caught her struggling to fully comprehend the scope of what I'd built. The critical difference was her willingness to try to ask questions, to acknowledge her limited understanding, to visit my properties with genuine interest, rather than skepticism. "Say, I've been recommending the Athena to everyone at the country club," she told me proudly during a recent phone call. Cynthia Blackwell was positively envious when I mentioned my daughter owns it. There was still an element of vicarious pride in her support, but I'd come to accept that perfect understanding might be beyond our reach. The improvement from dismissal to imperfect support represented significant progress. Isabel and I had established a more honest, if sometimes awkward, relationship. The competitive dynamic hadn't disappeared entirely, but acknowledging it had diminished its power. We'd even collaborated on a charity event hosted at the Athena, combining her legal connections with my hospitality expertise, a partnership that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "We make a good team when we're not trying to outdo each other," she'd observed after the successful fundraiser. "We always could have," I'd replied. "We just never gave ourselves the chance." Beyond family relationships, my professional life had continued to flourish. I'd acquired 2 additional properties in the past 6 months, expanding my portfolio to 9 luxury hotels across the Midwest. Liam had been promoted to Chief Operations Officer for the entire group, overseeing security and guest experience across all locations. Perhaps most significantly, I'd established the Vance Women in Hospitality Foundation, providing scholarships and mentorship to young women pursuing careers in the industry. The foundation's first class of 10 scholarship recipients had begun their programs that fall, each paired with successful women mentors from various aspects of the hospitality field. "You're creating the support system you never had," Dr. Reed observed during one of our now monthly check-in sessions, turning personal disappointment into structural change. I agreed. It feels more constructive than just being angry about the past. My personal life had evolved as well. After years of prioritizing my career above all else, I'd begun dating Daniel Hayes, an architectural restoration specialist I'd met during the renovation of my Chicago property. Unlike previous relationships that had failed due to my work commitments, Daniel understood the demands of building something meaningful and brought his own passion to the table. "Balance isn't about equal time," he'd said during our third date. "It's about equal respect for what matters to each person." That philosophy had allowed our relationship to flourish alongside my business responsibilities, neither demanding precedence over the other. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, I heard the penthouse door open and close, Liam arriving for our weekly strategy dinner. "Contemplating your empire?" he asked, joining me on the balcony with 2 glasses of wine. "Contemplating the journey," I corrected, accepting the offered glass. "Professional and personal." "Any regrets about how it all unfolded?" he asked, the dramatic revelation rather than a quieter approach. I considered this question carefully. I think the drama was necessary. My family had spent decades comfortably dismissing me. Comfort needed to be disrupted before real change could begin. Liam nodded. "Speaking of family, your mother called the front desk today. She actually made an appointment to see you next week, rather than demanding immediate access." "Progress comes in many forms," I mused. Later that evening, after reviewing expansion plans and operational reports with Liam, I checked my email to find a message from my father. He'd attached an article about female entrepreneurs in the hospitality industry that had featured me prominently. "So proud of what you've built," his message read. "Not just the hotels, but the foundation, the mentorship programs, all of it. You've created success on your own terms, which is far more impressive than following someone else's blueprint. Isabel and I were talking yesterday about how your approach to business has inspired her to consider more creative directions in her legal career. You've influenced all of us more than you know." The message brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not from sadness or lingering hurt, but from the simple power of finally being seen and valued for exactly who I was. The truth I discovered over these months was that revenge in its traditional sense had never been what I truly wanted. The fantasy of making my family regret their dismissal had been satisfying and abstract, but the reality of building healthier relationships had proven far more fulfilling than any moment of vindication. What I'd really sought wasn't their regret, but their recognition, not of my material success, but of my worth as an individual with valid choices and achievements. That recognition had finally come imperfectly, but genuinely, not because I'd forced it through dramatic revelation, but because I'd created space for it through honest communication and firm boundaries. The greatest revenge against those who underestimate you isn't making them sorry. It's making their opinion irrelevant to your sense of self-worth. My family's validation, now freely given, was welcome, but no longer necessary. I had built that validation from within brick by brick, alongside the hotels that stood as physical manifestations of my vision and determination. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about the young women in my foundation program, many of whom faced their own struggles with doubt and dismissal. The most valuable thing I could offer them wasn't just financial support or professional connections, but the understanding that other people's limitations should never become their own. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you most? How did you respond with anger, withdrawal, or determination to prove them wrong? Drop a comment below with your experience, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my story resonated with you. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from our most painful experiences, and I'm grateful to each of you for allowing me to share mine. Until next time, remember that true success isn't measured by others' recognition, but by the life you build on your own terms.